Vine House was the home of Ron and Sylvie Vine and their children Mike and Tui. It was known as the farmhouse. The Vines were the only family. It was simply the farmhouse and everybody knew where it was. And so it was a family home which served them very well for a very long time. It's a house that 4 people occupied for 16 years as they broke in a very rough piece of land and developed a farm out of a lot of scrub. The house was built probably in 1951 and finished in 52. And the Vines lived in the house until the mid-60s, until around 1964, I think. I started to come here very shortly after the house was complete because some of the earliest memories I have are of painting the house. And I kept coming because I formed a very strong friendship with Mike Vine for pretty much all of the years that they were here. He was just the older brother that you always wished you had. And Mike and I, we worked. We slashed scrub and we slashed gorse and we built fences and we did a variety of other things. I only wish that they were here to tell you the story. They lived that life. I was privileged to be a part of it over many years. Ron Vine was an agricultural journalist. He became quite well known. He eventually became the editor of the New Zealand Farmer. He started life first as an assistant in a nursery, and he decided that he would like to be a journalist because he was a great admirer of the power of words. And from that point on, he travelled the country, first in a motorcycle with a sidecar and a camera, because he realised that you got more for the stories if you could attach photographs to them. And then, as he sold more and more stories, he became more and more interested in farming. He learnt so much that he decided that he really should have a go at farming himself. And so it was in the course of a discussion with a farmer, this man asked him what would he do with a piece of land which was covered in gorse, had no legal access, and had virtually no fences. And Ron said, "You should lease it to me and let me have a go at it." The other challenge, of course, was that you had to bring everything in by boat. So Ron very quickly built a small flotilla of boats that could be used for different purposes, because without that it would have been impossible. He spent the next 16 or 17 years breaking in this farm, and in the course of it he wrote articles on pretty much everything he did. And so he decided that sheep would be the obvious thing. At one point he had a flock of 600 odd Romneys, but he read the journals and decided that Border Leicester sheep might be crossed with Romneys and make an ideal sheep for this type of land. And that was one of his earliest experiments in genetic modification and so on, and managing the genetics of the flock. And so most of the flock eventually were Romney Border Leicester cross. He had some major disadvantages and major logistical challenges, but he also had a wonderful set of skills, and including curiosity and ingenuity and a knowledge of the science that was going on at the time. And he managed to bring these all to bear. Ron was a great innovator, and he was in some ways driven to be an innovator by a shortage of capital, but his natural inclination was to find creative solutions. So when it came to building the house, the wool shed and the fertilizer shed, he needed cheap timber. And so he had timber felled up the harbour and dropped into the harbour. He towed it with a small boat down the harbour, up the Pukapuka River to a mill where the logs were milled. And then when the logs were milled, he towed them back down the harbour and into this bay here and landed them usually around here, or in the case for the house, further down the beach. So he argued that towing them along through salt water would deter insects and borer and various other things. These are some of the blocks that were built right on the beach and below the high tide mark. So they had to be built between tides and then brought up here and placed in front of the shed to dry. But these, you can see the shells on there, and that's just beach sand and shells, everything that came out on the end of a shovel. Mike and I were just told to keep shoveling stuff into the concrete mixer, really. Sand and shell that was on the beach, and we just kept shoveling it in and shoveling it in. But this was essentially an experiment because Ron was going to use a lot more blocks to build the house. And of course the house presents a somewhat different problem. The last of the structures which Ron built was the home, and one of the advantages of doing it last was that it gave him time to think about the best site and design questions and to talk with people who are knowledgeable about design. And so as a consequence, it's in a beautiful site, probably arguably the best and most sheltered site on the property, close to the water, and it has a number of architectural features which were remarked on at the time because they were considered modern. The first was the single pitch roof, and the roof itself used different materials. The second was that inside of the house is open, unlike a lot of the old farm villas at the time, which were a series of bedrooms down a central hallway. This has a large open space, which now is known as the open plan design. This is a very early example of the open plan design. The house is also very light, unlike a lot of older farmhouses, which were sort of really urban villas and urban bungalows built in the country. This place has a sort of a much more modern feel. It has large windows and rather less wall space. So you didn't get the huge collection of family photos because there wasn't the wall space to hang the family photos on. But what you did get was a superb view of the bay which lay in front of the house. And that in itself, building a house and orienting it to the view, was probably, as farm buildings went, more unusual than usual, yeah. In the summer, we slept out here on this veranda, and sometimes there would be 10, 12 kids all on the veranda, all in their army surplus sleeping bags, no mattresses and pillows, and that was it. Some nights we slept across the deck like that and just in a long row, and you probably get 9, 10 people there. Other nights we slept in rows of 3. And sometimes 4 if there was a little one, and we slept in 3 rows of 4 so you could get more people on the deck. So it was never especially comfortable, but the advantage of sleeping so close to the person next to you was at least you were warm. It was, as they say, a very full house, yeah. The kitchen, as you'll notice, is much lower than most kitchens, and it's because Sylvie had rickets and was much shorter than many people. So the kitchen was designed specifically for Sylvie, and Sylvie reigned in this area. She made huge amounts of food from a series of basic ingredients. All she needed was oats, flour, sugar and salt, and she could make anything. Some of the food came from the sea, some of the food came from the lambs that were kept and provided lamb and mutton for everybody. And Sylvie created all sorts of things out of this. The place smelt wonderful, but she mastered so many things. She became a potter, she spun wool, and a hostess that people remembered long, long after the meal. Sylvie was everything to everybody, I think, you know. Ron had very few close neighbours, but what Ron and Sylvie did have was a lot of company from artists and painters and poets and authors indeed from the other side of the harbour who lived in small bays on the Huawei Inlet. And they included people like Terry Bond and Rex Fairburn and Alison Pickmere, who was a noted watercolourist. This is one of a number of paintings that were given to the vines, and this one is by Rex Fairburn, or A.R.D. Fairburn as is also known. It's one of a number of paintings, including paintings that were given to Ron and Sylvie in payment for services such as Ron's tank building and assistance with boat building and so on. I think if you're looking for words to describe Ron, the best words are the words he used about himself. He was an incurable optimist. He believed there was a solution for every problem. And he believed that if he thought about it for long enough and spoke to the right people, he would find the solutions, and he invariably did. That with a site like this, that is as remote as this, you have to find solutions which are practical. He said what he lacked in skill, he made up for in optimism. And so, that's how I think you think of Ron.